Rosicrucian people.
Okay.
I explain you why I choose this one.
What number is that first? Let's just agree
I don't
on that.
know. I have to find.
It's number 59. Sorry, number 50. Number 50.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's also Christian Gnostic. I don't know. Maybe there are a little close matters.
Sure.
But it's about you spoke at the beginning of your talk about politics and religion, and I've heard that Freemasonry was inspired by Rosicrucian, and I know that at least in France, Freemasonry is deeply involved in politic laws.
Right.
So it's interesting to know what is the philosophy of these people and what do they believe in, where do they want to go, and I guess we may have answer in the Rosicrucian.
Okay, well that's a good one. I'm just going to get my book to guide my response, if I can find it here. Yes. Anton.
For example, the one world government, is it?
Is it a good thing or a threat?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. Well, that fits in the one I'm going to be talking about, which is I want to talk about political philosophy, theory and practice, which is box 165. Because I've been thinking a lot about this. Obviously, I trained as a university historian, but I focused on history of political ideas. And obviously I did my thesis on the Cold War, which was like Marxism and critiques of that. And so political theory is really important, and I'll be sharing about that. I'm not sure which to do first. I think, which do you want me to do first? You decide. Rosicrucianism?
No, starts with the, because it will give a general point of view, and after you will have a focus on
the Rosicrucians.
Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. If I go for the oldest, then I go with political theory because it's been around a very long time, and we know that when I studied political history of political ideas at the University of London, we had these amazing lectures on Plato and Aristotle and the greats, and it goes back at least to 400 BC as an organised, disciplined body of work. Obviously, people had been sitting around when they were building Stonehenge, 3000 BC, and saying, why do we have to bring those heavy stones over? Why does he keep telling us? What authority's he got to make us bring the stones? There'd been political stuff going on, but it was the beginning of what we call political philosophy in an ordered manner that we know of. So I'm going to start with that one, historically. And I think it's very relevant to the problems we're facing as a planet, because, as I said earlier, going back to the Gaza thing, there's a certain pseudo-politician who's come into power in the form of people like Trump and Netanyahu and Boris Johnson and Putin, who are just after naked power. And they were discussed, there are people in Plato's dialogues that say, there's no such thing as right and wrong, there's just power. There's how many troops have you got? And there were people back in those days that said political philosophy is a waste of time, just you need to get more power. And these people have been exacerbating that school of thought. Putin is a past master at accumulating economic military power. But it's gone to his head, and he thought it would be unchecked. He thought he was unstoppable, because he'd used even the internet to create Brexit and to give Trump power in America, using the KGB retooled as cyber warriors. So he thought he was immune to hubris, but it's the iron law of history, is if you accumulate the wrong kind of power in the wrong kind of way, eventually you topple. That was Herodotus, the father of history, observed that, and it's true now. Boris Johnson was the same. Thought he was unstoppable, did Brexit, which was just, he didn't realise he was a little, like a ventriloquist dummy for Putin. And the same with Trump, who's the same. He's the other dummy on the other hand, spouting Putin's kind of ideology, which is Christian fascism, actually. It's ethnic-centred Christian fascism, which is based on, the white race are the chosen Christian people that will triumph and conquer the world. Slavery is totally justified, and Muslims shouldn't have any rights. They're an inferior people. It's a sort of fake doctrine that Putin's invented to justify his own activities in Russia and his war against the Chechens and Muslims. And it's based on the paranoid weaponization of Muslim terrorism and the facilitation of it. And it seems to have then spilled over into the events of 9/11 and 26/11 in India. And of course, we're all terrified of Islam. So that's great. It helps promote this Christian fascist ideology, which is not the teachings of Christ. Christ was a man of non-violence, and he would say, if he could see this situation, he would say, these Muslims, they're my children too. They respect Christ as the Messiah. The founders of Islam, Khadija and Muhammad and Ali in the first generation, they loved Jesus. They honoured him. They honoured Mary, the mother of Jesus. And they believed totally in his messianic mission. What they felt is that the church had not got the message and had corrupted it. And therefore they needed this desert kind of witness to Gnostic Christianity, which is effectively what Islam is. The surrender of the ego to the absolute. So, okay, and what about Netanyahu? Well, he's the emperor of anti-Islam. He's used Israeli intelligence agents and cyber intelligence people to get everyone throughout the planet terrified about Islam. Really, it's his own ego that's terrified of surrender. And the people that have been working with him and doing assassinations and killings, and they're always taking somebody else out, are, a sort of demonic force that is utterly opposed to the very concept and idea of Islam. Well, I know that the greatest Jewish philosophers that I've studied and talked with and met and read, going right back, they respected Muhammad. They knew what Islam is about. And it seems that Muhammad was strongly influenced by Jewish rabbis and Kabbalists. There's an awful lot of esoteric Judaism in the birth of Islam. He was not only influenced by esoteric Christianity, but also the actual Kabbalah, and he must have met Jewish rabbis who taught him it. And in the Quran, which I've written a commentary on, I explain all this in great detail. The first time anyone has done that, just because of the unique circumstances of my own education and research, I've had the chance to do it. It took me 10 years, and now it's being translated into book format. At the moment it's only in audio format. And then I hope to get that translated into French and other languages, Arabic, Persian and so on. And so if one is anti-Islam, it's like saying I'm anti-peace, I'm anti-surrender, I'm anti the dissolution of my soul in the beloved's divine consciousness. I'm anti-divine intelligence. Well, if you're really coming from that place, that's a demonic place of rebellion against. So you're with Lucifer, you're with the Antichrist and so on. And I don't believe that is what we should be doing on the planet. I think the forces that are opposing spiritual wisdom are desperate and need themselves educating. But this is where political philosophy comes in, because what they say, these demonic forces, is, yeah, but there's no higher law beyond might and power. I, Netanyahu, can do what I want because I have the army, and I have the greatest intelligence service in the world, Mossad, at my beck and call. I've penetrated the private phone calls and messages of every single government in the world. I've got placed agents in the US Congress. I've hijacked both the Republican and Democratic parties, and I govern policy there. They daren't say anything against me. So nobody can stop me. I am supreme, says Netanyahu to himself at night. And therefore, I can, if I want, massacre and slaughter every single Palestinian man, woman and child in Gaza, 2 million of them, and nobody's going to stop me because I'm supreme. Now, the error with that way of thinking, and it's a very profound error, is ironic that the very voice that Israel should be promoting in the world, i.e. prophetic intelligence, does exist. There is a level higher than mere power. There is a divine nature, there is God, there is a spiritual law beyond human law. That very thing which Israel should be upholding is now being attacked from within by people like Netanyahu. He seems to have lost all his conscience. And that's what I'm pointing out as a political philosopher, is the tragedy of this situation. Okay, yes, question, comment.
Yeah, I do not understand well what you said, because in my thinking, Netanyahu is believing God is with him in some extent.
Okay.
That's the discourse, at least.
That's the public discourse
used by ministers.
But that's like saying Hitler was a Christian.
Yeah.
You know, Hitler used the church when he could,
Okay.
pretended to be a Christian.
It's only
It's
a discourse.
manipulation.
It's a propaganda. It's
Absolutely.
not a belief.
No, he has no soul connection
okay.
to the divine level of reality, or he
Okay.
couldn't do what he's doing.
Okay.
He was brought up in the Likud school by his father, who was private secretary to Jabotinsky, who brought in this kind of muscular Judaism, which essentially abandoned belief in God because God hadn't saved them from the Holocaust. A lot of pious, observing Jews had been slaughtered. So now they had to forget God and just use the sun, the sword and the gun to fight back. And that was the ancestor of the Likud party. Now, what's interesting is in Israel's society, the genuine Jews, the really pious Orthodox type, are against all this. They've identified this Israeli state as a product of the devil. They say they want nothing to do with it because they've realised it's going contrary. I mean, thou shalt not kill is one of the 10 commandments. And yet they're making these young boys in the Israeli Defence Force kill innocent women and children who are now rebelling and refusing to do that. But Netanyahu and his type have no conscience, no spiritual conscience. And it's because I think it's a bit like when we talked about the shock doctrine and the role of the economist, Milton Friedman. You see, these are secular Jewish thinkers who put economic theory and military theory on a pedestal. Kissinger was their grand master, shall we say. So only power matters. Morality, philosophy, spirituality, no, that's just for fools and idiots, time wasters. That's the way they think, genuinely. But I think they're wrong. What I'm trying to say and why I'm talking about political philosophy is, I think history, time and time again, has proved that people that think like that come to a bad end. Because once you leave the law of ethics, as Tolstoy pointed out, you take up the path of the Antichrist, or how you want to describe that, the anti-Messiah, and the anti-Buddha, or whatever. It's a collective ignorance, which I call Sophia-phobia. And I think the explanation for it is Sophia-phobia. These people are afraid of wisdom. They daren't look into their own conscience. And therefore they have to constantly blame the other, so they don't have to blame themselves at all. Netanyahu doesn't have to explain why his security service didn't react in advance, knowing that there was a breakout coming on the 7th of October. Warnings had been received, people were calling. There were many hours as they were waiting and being slaughtered. It's as if somebody stood the Israeli response down. Netanyahu has to answer these questions. Did they in some sense deliberately provoke Hamas to do this attack? And also, The other thing to say is, what about the preceding 50 years when they'd been marginalising, demonising and refusing to talk peace with the Palestinian Authority and then Hamas? It's all revealed in this book that I've been reading, which is a book of political science called Deluge. So I'm just saying, my summing up here is that the lesson I learned from the studies of political philosophy, and I studied all the great thinkers, in the European and Western and British context, is that there is, at the end of the day, there is a moral law, and politics is subject to that. And, Kant and all the other great thinkers, Hegel in his own way was trying to work out what is that moral law, the dialectic of history, called it. And even Marx in his own way, although he didn't kind of want to keep the idea of God, he found that too simplistic. But I wrote a book about Marx was secretly inspired by Freemasons, some of whom were his best friends. Moses Hess, that introduced Marx and Engels, was a Freemason, Polish, Jewish, lived in Paris. And I uncovered in my research a whole network of esoteric Freemasonic thinkers who were inspiring left-wing thinkers in Europe, communists and socialists, including the Marxists. But unfortunately, Lenin and Stalin, particularly, and Beria, again, they made the mistake thinking it's just power that matters, and we don't have to care about right and wrong. We just do what advances our power. And yet, what happened? The Soviet Union collapsed because it wasn't based on those ethical foundations. So I've just finished reading this book called Stalin's Hangmen, which is about, the people that worked with him. Utterly ruthless.
Do you think ethics is enough when you're not connected to the sacred?
Well, I think ethics, if you pursue it and take it seriously, will connect you to the sacred.
The problem
It gets you down on that
river.
river.
Nowadays we are kind in a strange period. If you ask people, at least in France, most people about the sacred, they say, I think not. But if you speak about ethics, they say, okay, we understand well. Some stuff can be done, some stuff must not be done.
There's still a right and wrong sense inside.
But maybe my fear is that if the sacred totally collapse, the ethics wall won't last. Can it last without the sacred? It's a question I ask you.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very, very good question. Sartre tried to construct a kind of ethics without the sacred. Camus pointed out you can't do that, and he wanted the sacred in there. So did Hannah Arendt, a secular Jew, but she knew how important the sacred is. Because for her, it's telling the truth that is at the core of ethics and of spirituality. I think the reason people are against religion is there have been too many false prophets, too many fake religious leaders who've used lies. There's a whole big case in Texas of evangelical Christians being done for sexual abuse. These kind of people give religion a terrible name. Yeah. And that's why the French, on the whole, are sick of this nonsense, And it's the same in all religions. Yogis and gurus, they're always misbehaving because it's power that corrupts people. So, but there are also good ones. In amongst all that lot, there are saints. Today we celebrate in Europe Saint Giles, patron saint of the insane and the lunatic, and also cripples, a very famous saint who lived in the south of France near Nîmes. And I think we still need the saints to keep society going, and that is the fountain of ethics. They're the people that teach the difference between right and wrong. That's why in Britain we're fortunate we have in schools. Often it's called philosophy and ethics, the exam that we take, and I used to teach. So yes, a good question, but I think we need both. Ethics without spirituality is is dangerous because you can distort it and you can end up with a kind of Nietzschean, then everything's permitted, let's just be Satanists and worship evil.
Well, the science tell you, the science is
Ambiguous.
more influential than ethics. We could see that with vaccination, for example. As there is an ethics law about Oviedo saying you cannot impose a treatment to somebody's body without consent.
And yet,
And
globally,
yet,
it was done.
And yet, it was not respected because the science, so-called science, said you must protect the population, vaccinating all the most
Mr. Fauci
people.
was
Yes.
the chief. Yeah, and yet he's now ill with the virus. It's a bit of irony going on there. Yes, so science has replaced
It's a fake
spirituality
science.
as
Yes.
the source of ethics. But I think this is where philosophy comes in, you know, and I'm a great respecter of science. But I do believe we need the sacred element to get the real core ethics. And as a follower of Emmanuel Mounier in the field of personalism, this great French Catholic intellectual, he said, don't do anything that offends the personhood of other people. Certainly don't impose treatments. It's our human right to make our own choices. We have the duty to listen to science and to hear all the arguments. You know, over the vaccination thing, I weighed up the options very carefully, and I decided not to be vaccinated, even though everyone was yelling you should, because I just felt there's a small chance you die of a heart attack, because the science was not known. And why put yourself to that risk? I've got too much work to do to die suddenly of a heart attack. I've got 20 more years of writing to do. So I felt it was unethical to put myself in the danger of dying of a heart attack suddenly with all this work to do. So I made that choice, and because I live in a very rural part of France, because I didn't have to by work, it was fine. I didn't have to. All I did was for a year I couldn't go in the local cafes, you know, but so what? But everyone had to make their own choice, and that's the beauty of ethics. We have that freedom of thought, freedom of choice. Okay, that's very exciting, thank you. I won't go on about political philosophy, except to say that maybe there's an echo in Aristotle's ideas, who was the formulator of scientific political thought after Plato, who was more the poet. And his idea of the doctrine of the mean, you know, between any kind of extremist views in politics, like extreme anarchy, everyone does what they want, no laws, or extreme government control, everyone does what the government says. There's a sort of middle way where a sort of social contract, yes, we're free, but we also respect laws and each other, and we're free as long as we don't harm others, you know, so there are limits to our freedom. Well, that's what Aristotle called the doctrine of the mean. And the virtuous choice is always that middle way. Now, I see a connection between that and the idea of the river between the mountains. If we find that mean, in most of the discussions that are going on the planet politically, if we look for that middle way, we follow that Aristotelian idea, I think we will come through this crisis that we're suffering as a planet. We just need to reread Aristotle, actually, and then apply it properly in terms of ethics. Okay, yes.
I have a very strange question. Imagine you want to go from India to China, not you crossing the sea. The problem, you have no water to go there. You must
climb a mountain.
No choice. So can we use that image also for a word? Maybe the Valley of Peace is not accessible. We have to go through the mountain to see what is behind it. That's just a joke.
No. It's a nice topographical conundrum. Mm-hmm. But I would say, using that metaphor, wherever you are on the planet, there is a river somewhere, even if it's underground. Even if you're in the Gobi Desert, there are underground rivers, and you can follow the tracks. You just need to learn to be a medium, you know, who can douse
okay.
the underground rivers, and that's what that's where the ovate comes in, the seer. We can find water wherever you are, even in the desert, and so anyway, okay, let's move on to Rosicrucians, because this is very exciting, talking about finding water and rivers. Yeah, I've been fascinated by the Rosicrucians since I lived in London and studied world religions and spirituality. They're quite prevalent in esoteric circles in Britain and also in Europe. It's a European-wide movement, as I discovered by researching it all. And the motif of Rosicrucian is a rosy cross. It's a symbol as a rose, a flower, on a cross. So instead of the normal Christianity has Jesus on the cross in pain, they put a rose there. And the rose was a symbol of wisdom and beauty and the goddess, Aphrodite even. And I went so far as to research the origin of the rose species of flowers. 60 million years old, these roses. And they're connected with, like strawberries, there's a whole big, if you look at the botany of the rose, they're one of the oldest flowers on the planet. And I remember as a boy, I used to have a grandfather and grandmother who had a beautiful garden in the Lake District. And I would smell these roses in their garden, beautiful pinks, and just the scent was so exquisite. And I think that is a sign of beauty at work, the rose. And that's my answer to Schopenhauer, who was a bit of a grump and said he didn't like women, didn't like love, thought the whole of evolution was a mistake and we should just end it all. You know, I think he didn't smell the roses enough, poor old Schopenhauer. So it seems, I mean, as to where it came from, I mean, there are people that say it was a Christian mystical lineage going even back to Christ himself. Some Rosicrucians say it goes further back to ancient Egypt, to Thutmose III in 1460 BC. Some say it was then introduced into Christianity. There are many mysteries there that we don't know the answers to yet. There was someone called Ormuz in the time of St. Mark in early Christianity in Egypt, who might have been influential in merging the stream current of Egyptian spirituality with Christian. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, we have this mysterious figure appears called Christian Rosenkreutz, who seems to have been a real person. Again, the name's a bit suspicious, like he sounds more like a character out of a play by Faust. Christian Rosy Cross, I mean, it's a bit of a giveaway. But anyway, he has this backstory. He was a spiritual seeker who went to Damascus and he explored the Islamic mysteries of Sufism. And that's very possible. You know, in about the 1300s, there were Christians going back and forth. And then he came back to Germany and bringing with him all this magical knowledge from the Sufis, which itself was from that esoteric form of Islam, which I've talked about in my commentary on the Quran, which is foundational to Christianity and drew heavily on Jewish Kabbalah and is a sort of universal faith beyond name and specificity. He dedicated himself to that and then died at an advanced age, like 200 years old. And he had himself put in like a living tomb. And it's quite a nice idea with his books and with nice stained glass windows and, you know, his sword and like an alchemist's tomb. And then that was discovered later. People found that tomb. This is the legend. Historians don't know if this is true. Is this just a sort of fantasy created later? We don't know, possibly. But certainly the idea is that of hidden wisdom coming from the East into Europe and then being carefully looked after. And so the idea is that Christian Rosenkreutz set up an order of Rosicrucians, his disciples, his friends, which would then meet every few decades. They were not like a normal charity that meets every year and has to do accounts to the Charity Commission. They were a cosmic charity that had to give their accounts to God, and they would meet every 40 years or something, and report on their various activities they've been doing for the world. They were only allowed to heal. They weren't allowed to make money as businessmen and traders. They were allowed to earn money by healing and other charitable works. And this society is interesting. Now, it is said by some that Lord Bacon, Francis Bacon, was a member of this society, the Rosicrucian Society, and in fact, in his works, The New Atlantis particularly, he has the symbol of the red cross on white as a sign of these scientists who were monitoring the House of Solomon, which was the scientists' body on the island of the New Atlantis. Now, is that just plucked from his imagination, or had he heard of the Rosicrucians? Probably the latter. There's also a very influential book by Dame Frances Yates, who inspired me when I worked in London at the Warburg Institute. She was a scholar. She wrote a book called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. And she argued that at that time of Francis Bacon, Elizabethan and Jacobean England, and particularly associated with the work of Dr. John Dee, who was the magus in the Tudor court, that they dreamed up the Rosicrucian idea and then spread it around Europe to give this notion that we're all collaborating together in one sacred work as scientists. And Dee, she reckons she's traced the origin of the Rosicrucians to Dee and Bacon, who then spread it around Europe as a common work, and that this is what science is for. But that science included the spiritual, ethical bit of goodness, charity, love, compassion, healing. It wasn't about power and might and ownership and ego. That's when science fell from its original vision of ethical, charitable works for the advancement of learning, which was the title of Bacon's work. Anyway, I think there's some truth in what Frances Yates wrote. I have that book, I've studied it, it's a classic. We know that they influenced a Lutheran theologian, Johann Valentine Andreae, who lived in what was then, the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, and who wrote some specific Rosicrucian works. It was him who wrote down the Christian Rosenkreuz legend, and he wrote a thing called The Chemical Wedding, which was an alchemical fantasy novel. I mean, in effect, these have made great films. These are like fantasy stories. He was a deep thinker, and he knew about the works of Bacon and Dee and all the rest. And there are people still studying all this who got there first, who invented the idea. We know also that Descartes, the great philosopher here in France from near me, he also heard about the Rosicrucians, and he wanted to join them. He was wandering around Europe. He'd been trying to fight in the 30 Years' War, but his heart wasn't into being a soldier. And he heard there were these mystical society of Rosicrucians who would only accept you if you were a really good person and very intelligent. And he said, I want to join. So he tried to join, but he couldn't find them.
Oh.
He never actually became an official member. But at one point in Paris, posters went up on the walls saying, Rosicrucians looking for virtuous people. If you want to, this is all in French, if you want to join, please, blah, blah, blah. And that's a fact. And the other great thinker at that time who wanted to become a Rosicrucian is Leibniz. Leibniz, a great intellectual who I greatly admire, he also heard of the Rosicrucians. And he knew about the importance of science. He knew there had to be a metaphysical counterpart to science. It's not just about weighing and measuring atoms. It's about redeeming society, making the world fit to live in, ending poverty, ending war, And so that was, the Rosicrucians provided the metaphysical counterpart to pure science. And that's what Leibniz signed up for. I think his position was, well, they can contact me if they want, they know where I am. He just got on with the work, which is the position I take. I've never joined an